Thorin and company, including the master thief Bilbo Baggins trying to recapture the heirloom of their fathers, and possibly to kill Smaug too, and thus to recapture the whole kingdom, had camped without at Erebor for some weeks. Bilbo had already done some exploration of the old hallways using the back door and had stolen a golden cup from the treasure. By this deed, and by Bilbo's bold speech, Smaug's anger was kindled. Erroneously believing, due to some remarks Bilbo had made during his conversation with Smaug, that some scheme of the men of Esgaroth was the reason for the dwarves in Bilbo's presence, so Smaug flew to Esgaroth to show them who's the true king under the mountain. Smaug's fires burned down the whole town, but the dragon was killed by Bard the bowman. The elves of Mirkwood soon learned that Smaug had been killed and thus set forth to claim the treasure, believing there was no one left who had a claim on it. Having heard of the disaster that had struck the befriended men, the elven host turned aside to offer any help that could be provided. Some day after the elves had arrived at the Lone Lake, a united host of men and elves set forth towards Erebor, believing that the dwarves had been among the first casualties of Smaug's wrath. To their surprise, they found Thorin and company quite alive, the gate to the halls beneath Erebor, barred by a wall, and themselves treated as foes, coming armed towards the gates. After Bard killed the dragon Smaug, the men of the lake and the wood elves both laid siege to the dwarves in the Lonely Mountain, the 13 dwarves under Thorin having refused to share any of the treasure that they had recaptured from Smaug. Thorin and company were then trapped in a bloodless siege, with Thranduil and Bard hoping to wait them out. However, Thorin had sent messages of his plight to his relatives, using talking messenger ravens. These reached Dane Ironfoot of the nearby Iron Hills, and he marched to the Lonely Mountain with 500 heavily armed dwarves, mostly skilled veterans of the War of the Dwarves and Orcs. When Dane's forces arrived, a battle was almost joined between the two sides. Now 3 armies were on the field, but at the last moment, Gandalf intervened between the two and revealed that while they were bickering amongst themselves, the goblins of the Misty Mountains and Grey Mountains under Bolg were using the opportunity to march against them. They had been incited by Gandalf's earlier slaying of the Great Goblin, but had now mobilized for a full-scale attack after hearing news of the death of the dragon, and the now relatively unguarded treasure hoard. The 3 commanders agreed that the Orcs, Wargs, and Bats were the enemies of all, and previous grievances between them were put on hold in face of the greater threat. They arranged their forces on the 2 spurs of the mountain that lined the valley leading to the now sealed-off Great Gate, the only entrance to the mountain. The 500 dwarves and 200 lakemen formed up on one spur, and over 1,000 elves on the other, while a light rearguard lined across the mouth of the valley to lure the orcs between the two, and thus destroy them. Bilbo Baggins, while invisible due to the ring, tried to sit out the battle on the spur held by the elves, the Ravenhill, where Gandalf also had withdrawn to. Soon the orcs, wargs, and a cloud of bats like a sea of locusts arrived, and at first the plan worked. They were lured into the choke point and took heavy losses. However, due to the orcs' superior numbers, the allied free folk did not hold the advantage long. The second wave was even worse than the first, and now many orcs scaled the mountain from the opposite side, and began to attack the arrayed forces from above and behind, as the main wave pressed forward. The battle raged across the mountain, and then a great noise was heard. Thorin and his 12 dwarf companions inside the mountain had thrown down the stone wall they had erected across the mouth of the gates, killing many orcs. Thorin and company then charged out to join the battle, covered from head to toe in the finest armor and weapons contained in the treasure hoard of the Lonely Mountain. Thorin advanced through the orcs' ranks all the way up to the gigantic orcs that formed the bodyguard of Bolg, whom he could not get past. The battle degenerated into a chaotic close-quarters melee, with no quarter given. As the battle was turning fully against the free folk, a number of great eagles of the Misty Mountains arrived. Bilbo was the first to spot their entrance on the scene and began shouting that the eagles are coming, a shout that was then continued among the other troops of the free folk. At this point, Bilbo was knocked in the head by a large stone thrown by orcs from above on the mountain, and he passed out. With the support of the great eagles, the battle turned back against the orcs. Then Beorn himself arrived at the battle, apparently having heard the news that a large army of orcs was on the move. This time he did not appear in his former shape of a giant man but had changed his skin to that of a gigantic bear. Beorn drove through the orc lines but paused to carry the wounded Thorin out of the battle. Beorn then returned to the battle with even greater wrath and scattered the ranks of the bodyguard of Balg, ultimately killing Balg himself. The orcs eventually panicked and scattered, to be picked off by hunting forces from the victors later. Many of the orc survivors died in the forest of Mirkwood. When Bilbo regained consciousness, the battle was already over. Thorin II had been mortally wounded on the field, and his nephews Fíli and Kíli died defending him as he lay on the ground. Thorin died soon after the battle, but had time to say a last goodbye to Bilbo. After defeating the Orcs and Wargs, the victors divided the treasure. Bard took Bilbo's 14th share of the gold and silver in return for the Arkenstone, whereupon he shared his reward with the master of Laketown, and gave the Elven-king Thranduil the emeralds of Girion. Bilbo, despite having forfeited his share, was offered a rich reward, but refused to take more than 2 small chests of gold and silver, which was still enough to leave him a wealthy hobbit back in the Shire for 60 years. Very few orcs survived the battle, which had the effect of breaking the power of the northern orcs. Consequently, they were not able to field vast numbers in the War of the Ring, reducing the strength of the attacks on Lothlorien and Thranduil's realm, and preventing an invasion of Erebor. With the refounding of the kingdom under the mountain and the kingdom of Dale, the western lands gained a bastion in the north, blocking the expansion of Sauron's power westwards.